Good afternoon, and welcome to our afternoon session. A little bit about our process this afternoon. We're going to go into 4 areas quite briefly. Where we come from, that is what we bring to the table, where we are now, and developing a common language for fruitful dialogue. You know, parish experience is different for every one of us, given our backgrounds and the demographics. So we want, before we can have a dialogue, we want to be on the same page. So we'll develop a common language. And we'll talk about common language for the faith and the parish. And then an exploration of family life. Because as you know, and as you heard His Eminence say this morning, it's so important. And it's one of those areas that is really ripe for development. And we have so many representatives here from family life, one area of family life or another. And then finally, we'll talk about where we can go and explore some opportunities for formation and for family in the parish and in family life. So, I know we all just came from lunch. But we're going to think about food for a moment. So I'd like you to see that loaf of bread and imagine, just close your eyes and imagine the bread baking, the smell of it, the attraction, the warmth, and how you just want to break it and to take it. And the reason I use that bread is to get us into one of the images that was given to us by the Council Fathers in the decree on the laity. We said the mission of the laity, we are to be leaven in the world. We're the leaven of Christ in the world. And so we make up that leavening, and we become something that we sacrifice, that we're broken and shared with others. So that element of service is in there. So that's a church. The church has given us that very beautiful image for us as lay people. We're leaven in the world. Sometimes when I give talks, I take a loaf of bread like this, and I also go to the bakery. I'm half Calabrese, so I ask for a loaf of Calabrese bread with no leavening. And they give me something that's like a brick, and I pass it around to people. And we pass the one that's got the leavening and the one without. And the one without, you can't even break it. And even the birds won't eat it. I tried to feed it to the birds. So I'd like us to just get into that image, that we are called to be leaven. And so as we work on formation, it's really important that our formation be solid and reach out. And we'll talk about the pastoral plan and that invitation to move outward as well. Okay. So just a little bit about us. To my left and to my right are Patrick and Carissa Douglas. And Patrick and Carissa live in Sutton, Ontario, with their 14 children, ages 1 to 19. I've met a few of them. They're beautiful in every way, inside and out. So since 2018, Patrick has been serving in the Office of Formation for Discipleship as the Associate Director for Family Life and Special Projects, and also more recently in the role of co-director, the administration side, for the Office of Formation for Discipleship. And prior to that, he was the Director for Human Resources and Operations at the Newman Center for 17 years. He also has a professional degree in engineering and is a human resources specialist. So Patrick brings a lot to the table in terms of our experience as lay people. His degree is in engineering chemistry from Queen's University, and in his free time, and permission to laugh at that, in his free time at home, he's taking courses at St. Augustine Seminary in theology. Carissa is the author and illustrator of the Little Douglings Catholic Children's Book Series and the Douglings Adventure junior fiction novels published through Scepter Publishers. Carissa is also the producer of Shalom World Television's Little Douglings Play and Pray series and other video shorts. Together, Patrick and Carissa are passionate about finding new ways to evangelize and share the richness of their Catholic faith.
Allow me to jump in here. I'm going to introduce Connie. Connie Price holds a bachelor's degree in theology from Creighton University, a Master of Divinity from the University of Toronto, and a PhD in systematic theology from the University of Toronto's St. Michael's College. Her music studies were completed at the Royal Conservatory of Music in Toronto. For 22 years, Connie has served the Archdiocese as a consultant, presenter, writer, and speaker. She is also a lecturer here at St. Augustine Seminary and a facilitator for the virtual learning community for faith formation at the University of Dayton. She is also currently a member of the advisory board at St. Michael's Choir School, the publication board for Novalis, and an archdiocesan representative on the Central Region Catechetical Association. So that's who we are.
That's who we are. So between us, we try to be leaven in so many different ways, from our liturgical ministry experience to our writing and editing, to engineering and human resources, and everyone in this room, if we put our experiences together, we would be representative all over the place. That's great news for the church. So I'd like us to just talk a little bit about our common language so that we can have a fruitful discussion. And I'd like to bring common language to the faith, the parish, and the pastoral plan. That's what's going to guide our discussion today. Okay. So with the faith, just a reminder, I know that I don't want to insult your intelligence if you already know this. Just consider it a nice review on a beautiful Saturday. The 4 pillars of the faith are belief, our doctrine, what's in the creed, celebration, liturgy and sacraments, how we celebrate, and those two are related. What we believe is what we celebrate is what we believe. Life in Christ, the moral and social teachings of the church, and prayer. So those are the 4 pillars, and we get that from the Catechism. That's the structure of the Catechism. With the parish, we talk about 3 things. The Word, the parish is sustained by the Word of God. So I put the lectionary there instead of the Bible, just to emphasize parish life. Liturgy and sacraments, so we see the Eucharist. On top is an illustration of the entire liturgical year, the entire church reflection on the life of Christ and his mother and the saints, and the sacraments beneath that, in the center. And on the right, it's the outreach in justice and love and charity, the idea that the parish, the other aspect of parish life, when we are talking about parish today, in this conversation is word, sacrament, parish outreach. And on the right there, you might wonder what that is. I selected a few logos. So it's not exhaustive at all, from Share Life, St. Vincent de Paul, Catholic Charities, Knights of Columbus, Catholic Women's League. There are many more I can add, but it's just to make the illustration. So that's what we mean today when we're talking about parish. And then in the pastoral plan, the Archdiocesan Pastoral Plan, as Eminence mentioned this morning, it really is what guides us. And I was reading an interesting section of the new directory for catechesis, which came out in 2020. And in that directory, there was a section on lay associations and movements and groups of faith groups. And it said, for all they can really enrich the church, but they can also have a lot of differences as they work in their charisms. And it said the one unifying thing, it said all of those groups should adhere to their diocesan pastoral plan. And I was delighted to read that, meaning that's what unifies us. So today in the pastoral plan, I'm just going to talk about the parish life section, just to bring you up to speed. It might be a while since you've read it when it came out. And there are 8 outcomes on parish life. And so I would just like to plant these seeds and get them in our heads, and then we're going to jump to the catechism for a moment and then turn over to family life. All right? We're okay so far, right? I see nods. Good. So of those outcomes, this is just a reflection to get this back in your head. The celebration of Sunday Eucharist with full, conscious, active participation of the faithful. That will enter into how we offer formation programs. So we're keeping this in mind. Number 2, the opportunity for prayer, spiritual formation, and enrichment. Cardinal Collins mentions in the pastoral plan that a parish should be an oasis for prayer and spiritual formation. So that too will enter into what we could possibly do in formation. The 3rd one, a communal life in the parish which offers welcome, hospitality, and outreach. Loads of possibilities for formation there. The 4th one addresses pastoral leadership. Strong pastoral leadership in the parish, which promotes diverse and collaborative roles of pastoral service. So it's easy sometimes in parish life, especially for those of us who are involved in parish ministries, to forget that service aspect of it. In formation, we bring that back into focus. And then the last 4 outcomes, and these are, by last, I mean numerically last, not of importance: effective pastoral governance, structures and committees in the parish which promotes stewardship and ensures accountability. The pastoral plan speaks, there is a sentence in there that speaks to all of us, and it is that stewardship begins with gratitude and ends with responsibility. And when we think about that, and we put that in the context of what could be lay formation, and where that can start and where that ends, it's beautiful. The next one is supporting the family, the domestic church. And you'll hear a lot more about family life very soon. Number 7 is commitment to a renewed evangelization, catechesis, and formation in the faith. That's where I come in. A lot of people talk to me about catechesis because I'm associate director for catechesis. And the definition of catechesis is so broad, judging by the phone calls I get from you, from the parishes. So we'd like to bring that into focus a bit. And finally, a strong witness to an apostolic mission, the outreach ministries and services. So that's the outline, and that's what's going to guide our discussion in anything that we talk about with formation in the parish and in family life. And then finally, I'd like to just let you reflect on what the church tells us about a parish. Again, because all of our experiences are so different. I don't like to read to adults, but today I'm going to do it, okay? Just for a few moments. So you can close your eyes and listen. A parish, this is catechism, a parish is a definite community of Christian faithful established on a stable basis within a particular church. The pastoral care of the parish is entrusted to a pastor as its own shepherd under the authority of the diocesan bishop. That part we know pretty well, eh? It is the place where all the faithful can be gathered together for the Sunday celebration of the Eucharist. The parish initiates the Christian people into the ordinary expression of the liturgical life. It gathers them together in this celebration. It teaches Christ's saving doctrine. It practices the charity of the Lord in good works and brotherly love. So there you see those 3 pillars, right, of parish life: the word, sacrament, and outreach and charity. So it's all there, and this is where it comes from. And then finally, by way of transition into family life, the very next paragraph in the Catechism: education in the faith by the parents should begin in the child's earliest years. This already happens when family members help one another to grow in faith by the witness of a Christian life in keeping with the gospel. Family catechesis precedes, accompanies, and enriches other forms of instruction in the faith. Parents have the mission of teaching their children to pray and to discover their vocation as children of God. Now here's the beautiful sentence, everyone. The parish is the Eucharistic community and the heart of the liturgical life of Christian families. It is the privileged place for the catechesis of children and parents. So with that, I will hand it over to Patrick and Carissa to speak about that catechesis of children and parish in the context of family life.
See if my slide goes over. Excellent. Thank you, Connie. Carissa and I were honored to be part of the Canadian delegation at the 10th World Meeting of Families in Rome this past June. And we were inspired by the faithful witness of so many families and presenters, and were able to connect with family life leaders from across Canada. It was an occasion for recollection on what the church is calling families to, calling us to in our generation. So we ask ourselves, what is the church asking of families? And I propose it could be answered in 3 ways. The first is, family, become what you are. This is a famous phrase from St. Pope John Paul II in Familiaris Consortio number 17. Here he identifies the mission to guard, reveal, and communicate love, which is derived from the very identity of the family, the place where God communicates his life and his love. The second comes from our Archdiocesan Pastoral Plan. The Christian family is the vessel through which we have the opportunity to evangelize the world. And the third, and we heard a lot about this in Dr. Topping's talk, is the parents are primary educators of their children, and this comes from Catechism number 2223. So picking up on that point, this is reflected, the role of parents is reflected in the current social science and data trends. Researchers Dr. Christian Smith and Melina Lundquist-Denton said in their 2013 book on the influences of adolescence and what sort of forms their political and religious identities, they said this: contrary to popular misguided cultural stereotypes and frequent parental misperceptions, we believe the evidence clearly shows that the single most important social influence on the religious and spiritual lives of adolescents is their parents. But the question is, in which direction will this parental influence go? Towards or away from the practice of the faith? And unfortunately, we're all too well aware of the declining faith among the younger generations. And it's no surprise to see that generally, parents are more likely to be able to pass on the faith to their children when they are married. According to an Ipsos study commissioned by Communio, a nonprofit that fuses family ministry with data analytics, they say that a parent's marriage has a massive lifelong impact on whether their kids practice Christianity as adults. Millennials from married homes are 78% more likely to attend church than peers from unmarried homes. In fact, those from married homes across the last 3 generations regularly attend church at nearly the same rate. And a 2019 Barna survey, also commissioned by Communio, 72% of churches lack a substantive marriage ministry. 74% of all churches have no ministry for newlyweds, and 93% of churches do not offer any ministries for singles. There is a huge opportunity here to tend to these areas of the vineyard. At the World Meeting of Families, many of the discussion panels were concerned with how the church can support marriages and families. We recognize the importance of supporting people in their needs first. This is the case with both the most committed and active families in our parishes, but also those who are occasional churchgoers, those who have fallen away from the practice of their faith, and even non-Catholics. Many couples shared about the benefits of accompanying those in regular and irregular marital situations through community friendships, honesty about church teaching, and sound pastoral counseling. We also learned about the marriage catechumenate. And it was introduced with a new document from the Vatican called Catechumenal Itineraries for Married Life. This document provides a reflection on the phases of remote and proximal preparation for marriage, and perhaps what's most currently neglected, the accompaniment of newly married couples. In order to support parents as primary educators, there must be special attention to the ongoing formation of couples and parents, both in terms of evangelization and catechesis, but also in holiness, living out holiness in domestic life. One method of formation in family holiness is through learning the stories of a number of married saints, blesseds, and holy men and women, like the saints of the Martin family, or Blessed Luigi and Maria Beltrame, the patrons of this past World Meeting of Families. Holiness in life is necessarily different from that of the monastic character of holiness, as beautiful as that is, but that's an opportunity for us to explore what that spirituality really means in domestic church life. Finally, I'd like to address the formation of families at the intersection of what St. John Paul II called the apostolate of families and parish life, and Connie also mentioned this in the context of the Catechism. In St. John Paul II's 1994 letter to families, he lauds the practice of families coming together to strengthen and learn from one another, parents by parents and children by children. It is from this sphere of the domestic church that families can be nourished by and contribute to the hierarchical church, and most naturally in the life of the parish community. And the parish is, of course, the family of families. In order to live up to its mission, the family needs to be centered on the Eucharist, on Jesus, and the sacraments that foster formation and holiness in order to power domestic life and offer service to the community. While it is already working well in many places, at the World Meeting of Families, one priest reminded us of the complementary vocations of priests and spouses, quoting from Pope Francis that every Christian vocation is spousal. As spiritual mentors, priests can encourage and support spouses as co-workers, not simply as assistants, in the work of initiating and sustaining a thriving family ministry in a parish community. We're also so appreciative to have among us those from among the lay movements, associations, and organizations that we've worked with to celebrate Marriage Sunday in our Archdiocese and that build up marriage and marriage ministries. We look forward to collaborating with you and learning from each other in the future as our family life enterprise grows. And within these groups, we also not only see activities just for children or for youth, for our elders, which is all very good in the various ages and stages of life, but a true intergenerational approach where each learns from the other. So now I'm going to pass the mic to my better half and my beautiful bride, amazing author and illustrious illustrator, and she's going to talk a little bit more about our own personal family's mission.
All right. I'm not so techie. I had to literally tell him which arrow means go forward. Yeah. So you've probably heard it said, go big or go home. Well, I think Patrick and I have encompassed this as our family mission, clearly, although it's more like stay home and go big. Having the honor of raising 14 children with Patrick has been so much joy. It's been more than I could ever imagine. And it is the full integration of our faith into our family life that has made that joy a reality to us. And so even amidst our surprising challenges, there we go. This is Kiara, one of our children. She's very proud of the slide, so I'm not embarrassing her, and actually she demanded us to show it, but I thought it was perfect because it is like a window into our family on a lot of days. There's one picture where she's with her baby sister, and that's where she was pretending that Rice Krispies were chicken feed, and she spread it around as her little sister pecked at it. Very creative. She's a very creative person and adventurous and so sweet and fun, but pretty messy. And this is a perfect window because I think parenting can be very messy. I think most of you have had very messy moments if you've engaged with parenting, so it's par for the course. Families who are striving to live out their Catholic faith are often met with these messy moments, but the gift is that we come to understand that these can be used to refine us into much holier versions of ourselves. So we've been taking our children to Mass since day one, and I mean literally day one. Ooh, go back. There it is. When I was very pregnant, actually in labor, probably early stages of labor, and it progressed to the point where I had to go to the hospital with our very first child. We jumped in the car and we drove towards the hospital. And then I noticed that we were going to be passing our church at 5 p.m. on a Saturday. So I thought, hey, let's go in. And he looked at me like I was crazy, and I'm like, it's a first delivery. These things take a long time, don't worry. And he's like, okay. So we went in, and we started to attend Mass, and at that point, every 5 minutes, I was feeling it. And Patrick kept looking over at me like, let's go, and I'm like, not yet, it's not so bad. And then I remember at one point, it did get to the point where I was almost making a little bit of noise, and so I'm like, okay, I can't, I have to hide this. I don't have people that can hide this. So I started praying that the contractions would happen right when the responses were needed, because that was much more appropriate. So Father was like, the Lord be with you, and I was like, yeah, and also with you. And the funny thing is, this was the old translation, obviously, for one. And for second, there was a lot of people who just thought I was a very passionate Catholic, I think at one point after communion, Patrick kind of motioned towards the door, now come on, let's go. And I saw all the people of the receive and leave persuasion, and I thought, I'm not going to compete with them. I'm not going to be one of them. I'm not doing this. So I kind of turned and said, we need the final blessing. And he's like, okay. So we stayed in the pew for a little longer, and I was kind of breathing a little more heavily, and he was looking over and sweating and making his head more shiny. And it was probably a tense moment for him, probably the longest Mass I've ever been to, and probably even longer for Patrick. And then finally he kind of motioned, he said, okay, now. And I thought, it's rude to leave before the final hymn. So he's like, okay, fine. So then finally the final hymn ended and we were off, and I had a lot of time. Again, these first pregnancies, they last a long time, these labors. So I knew it was okay, and all was good, and we gave birth to a beautiful son, and that son is quite big now. But first I want to say a disclaimer. I don't advise very pregnant women who are in labor to go to Mass, just as a disclaimer for all you priests out there who do not want to be calling out clean up in the center aisle. But anyway, it was a wonderful start, and it reminded me actually of another baby that was born and went to Mass very quickly. That was Pope Benedict XVI. I believe he was born on Holy Saturday, and then by the time the vigil came, they brought him to be baptized, and I thought he turned out well, so. Our son, Liam, is actually doing really well, too. He's now in his second year at U of T, doing a double major in philosophy and in Christianity and culture. And I have definitely given Cardinal Collins' number to him, 416-934-0606. So many Catholic parents, are willing to go to such great lengths to ensure our children are being properly nurtured. But it's such an unpredictable journey, and there is such a need that we have to source out materials, books, support systems that will help us in that journey. Recently, I wrote a junior fiction novel starring St. Teresa of Avila. And she takes a group of children through her interior castle. Most of you here probably know of this great work where St. Teresa presents the soul as a great crystal castle made up of 7 mansions. It speaks to a spiritual journey where we seek to approach and unite our hearts to Christ, who is waiting at the center in the 7th mansion, the King's Helm. And I was struck by her description of the first 2 mansions, actually. In the first, we're free from mortal sin, but distracted to a great degree by the world and all its affairs. And we are unable to hear or to see. As St. Teresa says, the souls there are deaf and blind. In the second mansion, we are still blind, but we are able to hear God's voice through the works, words, and writings of others. So in this mansion, we have to be so cautious about what mediums we choose to partake of. For some of the writings, advice, music, works, and such are meant to pull us back into the world and away from Christ, and made me more sensible of the great responsibility of all those who are tasked with creating works, movements, and materials, because we are able to allow God to speak to us through others and through our endeavors. And those works are highly influential. So we have 10 daughters and 4 boys. We need to actually connect with the previous speaker, Dr. Toffler. He's got 9 boys, we've got 10 girls. Just saying. And when the eldest girls were quite small, about 8 years old and under, I remember complaining to some of my fellow Catholic moms that none of them seemed to be talking about a potential call to religious life. It was a Catholic mom problem, right? Right up there with my toddler keeps drinking from the holy water font, or my 12-year-old scapular smells like death. Big problem. Anyway, another mom was there, and she's awesome. And she responded kind of surprised, and she said, "Oh, really? All my children talk about religious callings." And in my mind, I was like, it's not a competition. It's not a competition. It's a calling. Anyway, a short while later, my girls were watching a beautiful movie. It was Therese, about the life of St. Therese of Lisieux. And suddenly, Everyone was dressed in veils. They took all the sheets off my beds and stripped them and were laying down, flat-faced on the ground in the living room. I had to kind of tiptoe around them. It was beautiful. And they actually, from then on, there was a lot of masses and a lot of final vows being professed in our living room. It was great. And now, actually, as they've grown, people will often ask them, priests especially, will come up and say, so, have you ever considered religious life? Same with our boys. And all of them seem to respond that they want to discern and embrace whichever vocation God has prepared for them. But it did make it very clear that our children need inspiration and guidance. They need exposure to good and holy things. They need good role models as well, both through the sharing of the lives of the saints, which are the most incredible role models, but as well as encountering those pursuing holiness on earth as well. I remember taking the children to a picnic put on by the Sisters of Life, and our kids are still talking about the joyful nature of the women and also how incredible their aim is with water balloons. So this culture in which we embrace, these are some of our little dress-ups. I thought I'd share that. So the culture in which we immerse our children is building something true, something good, something beautiful, and something that will carry them through the most difficult times. Patrick spoke about our recent trip to Rome for the World Meeting of Families. And there we heard from couples all over whose efforts to build up their own families, their own domestic churches, through a commitment to prayer, to teaching the faith, as well as daily fostering Christian values within the home, prepared them for great unforeseen trials. One of the talks was on forgiveness. The couple who shared were Danny Abdallah and his wife Layla, whose children, 8-year-old Sienna, 12-year-old Angelina, and 13-year-old Anthony, as well as their cousin Veronique, who was 11, were mowed down by a drunk driver who was 3 times over the legal blood alcohol limit. The children were riding their bikes. They were going to celebrate Veronique's birthday by getting some ice cream. The mother, Layla, had gone to the hospital with a 4th child who was also injured. And when she learned of their deaths, she immediately told her husband to share on social media that she wanted to forgive the driver. She spoke about the Catholic culture within their home before the deaths of 3 of their now 7 children. She spoke about her son, Anthony, who told her years before that he had a dream of Jesus. In his dream, Christ asked what he wanted more than anything, and the boy answered, "To be with you." Jesus told him that he soon would be. Layla shared how that was a very uncomfortable thing to hear, but it spoke to the fervent faith that was being fostered within their home. Now, this story hit me very hard because my own little sister at 4 years old had been hit by a car while waiting for her school bus and had passed away. My mother, who had worked very hard to help us get to know Christ, she brought him into every aspect of our life. There was no, this part, my life is my faith and this is regular life. Like, it was all integrated in a seamless, perfect way. That even at a young age, we were comforted with knowing the love of Christ and the hope that he has for all of us. And that's what helped us carry through that unimaginable loss. Knowing that my sister wouldn't make it, the doctors allowed my mother to hold her while she died. She said she rocked her, and she spoke to her, and she asked Christ to think of her siblings, to pray, to look upon them with love, to inspire them. And she also, in the last moments, as my sister died, sang praises to God. And she knows that that was a supernatural grace given, and those graces do come when we have that life that is so very centered on Christ. But the Abdallah's sharing was also relatable because my mother told us about the day she had to go to court to face the ones who had been charged in my sister's death. We knew it was an accident, but we still wondered, how would my parents be able to face these people? When my mother entered the building, she immediately began searching him out. And when they locked eyes, she hurried to him. She wrapped her arms around him in a tight embrace and whispered, "All is forgiven. I have nothing but love for you." And he broke down in tears, and she told him that she knew her daughter would be praying for him in heaven. These are the heroic moments that stem from a heart fully centered on Christ, and the family that can foster such a faith within their home can eventually see every hardship as a means of growing in holiness. Nothing can fully crush a person who's wholly united to Christ, for every instance is seen as a part of God's plan, and therefore even great hardships are understood to be in service to a good end for that soul, and thus are perfumed with joy. The lessons on forgiveness my mother imparted is something that I now seek to foster in my own children. And as I've talked with many other families, I realized there's even something in a virtue or an aspect of learning to forgive, or forgiveness in the home is something that can be misunderstood. There's some families that believe that it's more of a feeling as opposed to a choice, as opposed to an act of love, that sometimes we need help reminding ourselves that we've offered. And so I think that families could really use some resources and some catechetical sessions to help us in terms of firming up our faith and understanding what the church teaches on these elements so that we can bring them into our home. A few years ago, Pope Francis said, that's our family, some pictures. A few years ago, Pope Francis said, "The thing the church needs most today is the ability to heal wounds and to warm the hearts of the faithful. It needs nearness, proximity. I see the church as a field hospital after battle." Now, I remember when I first read this quote, I was a young mom who'd recently gone to a really, really, really hard mass. I should say holy mass, because that's the new way I look at it. I was about, 7 months pregnant with my 8th, and we were traveling to Denver, Colorado. It had been a 26-hour drive, and we decided the best thing to do would go to Mass right after arriving. So our kids were understandably a little irritable, but we brought them in. And in church, we have this rule. It's you sit in a spot, you stay in the spot. Otherwise, our section of the church would look more like musical pews. And so on that day, I guess because of the long trip, they were extra irritable, and everyone was fighting to sit beside me, and I only have a couple sides. So Patrick was sitting closest to the aisle in the pew, and I was kind of bookending it on the other side with our children in between. And some of them were still a little bit irritated that they didn't get the prime real estate beside me. I was holding the baby, and it was time to go to communion, so we all stood up. And we started to go in, and some of the older children, I'm saying like 4 or 5-year-olds, had this great plan. They thought, this is time we're moving. I'm going to shift my position so that I can get closer to Mom. So a couple of them started shifting past my little 3-year-old, Serena. And a few of them passed her, and then she caught on. She knew that she had been, violated in some way. They have taken this beautiful gift of sitting beside me away from her. So she decided to just freeze. And whenever she got very upset, that was her tactic. She would kind of look like a deer caught in headlights. So she kind of just stood there and went, and it created a traffic jam in the pew. No one could go anywhere. We couldn't get around her. And so I thought, I've traveled so far, I need to receive the Eucharist right now. I need Jesus. So I decided, okay, I'm at the end. I'm going to be smart. I'm going to back out into the side aisle, go all the way around the back and come forward and join them at the center aisle. So I did that. And then one little girl caught on. And so she ran after me and held onto my hand. So I have a baby in one arm, and I'm gripping my 4-year-old's daughter, Angelica's hand. So we're coming up the aisle, and as we come to where my family is still sitting, I see poor Serena still frozen, this little 3-year-old. So she's like this, except she sees me start to pass, and her eye kind of twitches. And she decides, that's it, I'm going to go for it. So she breaks out and grabs onto my leg. So I'm now going down the aisle holding a baby in one arm, gripping the 4-year-old's hand in the other. And as I'm progressing up the aisle with this now 3-year-old dragging along on my foot or my leg, I start to realize, no, I'm wearing maternity pants. And those things are very stretchy. So as I walk, I start to feel the pants slowly shifting down and down. And I looked up at the crucifix as I'm approaching the altar, and I'm thinking, Lord, I know this vocation. You're asking us to unite ourselves to the cross, but right now you're about to unite me to the stripping, and I'm not going for it. So I thought, what can I do? So I just made up my mind, okay, do I let go of the baby? Probably not. Do I wrench my hand out? Like, how do I do this? So I think, okay, I'm going to somehow break my hand free from this 4-year-old. So I did that. She didn't cry, all good. And then I started to pull my pride back up and adjust it. And then I decided to pull the addition, the extra person on my leg, off of me. And she was so mad at this point that we were beyond frozen deer at this point. So she hit the ground, and I could tell she was about to explode. And this is like, as I'm about to receive Jesus, it was a mess. So then I turn around and look at her, and she's gone into that mode where, I don't know if those of you who have children know that sometimes their cry, it's like if they're really upset, there's a delayed response. So they kind of go, they hit the ground and they go, and you know it's coming, you know it's going to explode. But thankfully, she did that long enough that Patrick had come around and he was able to pick her up and run her out of the church. And in the distance, I heard, so it was wonderful. After that Mass, I was shaking, like literally shaking. And Patrick, I think he missed a lot of it. So he turned and he was like, that was a good Mass. And I'm like, I'm not happy. And he said, well, it's National Donut Day and there's free donuts at Krispy Kreme's. And I said, okay, it's better. So the point is, I share this story because I think we need to understand what young families sometimes go through, especially with little ones, and how much they need our support and compassion and understanding. Because even the most, well-disciplined or children that are usually well-behaved, they can still have their moments. They can still have those times where it's not going to look so pretty for the parents. And so my plea is always, as especially a priest, just think of us, remember us, pray for us, and we will do our best as we continue. But I also want to talk about how much it meant to us to have those priests that spoke on our behalf at Masses. Some of them would talk to parishioners and just say, we have some little people with us. It means the church is alive. Parents, do your best. If they really need space outside, go ahead. And so even just that action, that interaction, that support from the church goes so far. Parents really appreciate that. So this wonderful quote that I love, I've always seen it as, when he says, I see the church as a field hospital after battle, I sometimes think that parents read it as, I see the Mass as sometimes a war where you're in the trenches, and sippy cups are grenades and all kinds of things. But now I read it, I guess, in a different way. I see it as really appropriate for the church post restrictions from the pandemic. It was written, of course, it was put out pre-COVID, but now I look at it and it's true. The thing the church needs most today is the ability to heal wounds and to warm the hearts of the faithful. It needs nearness, proximity. So we have a whole new group, I guess a whole new issue to deal with, and that is compelling families that have felt war-torn from COVID and from the COVID experience, how to engage them, how to invite them, bring them back to church, and offer that nearness and proximity. I think this is, to use Father's analogy, if it's the vineyard, this part of the vineyard was heavily battered from the storm and definitely needs to be nurtured back in. COVID on families, some people thrived in it, but some families really didn't. Some families saw that proximity or saw that it was bringing out deep fissures in their relationships and in their faith. Some people felt so alone that they started to lose that connection and started to feel like that they were battling their lives alone. And so we really need to work as a church to bring them back, and I'm sure St. Monica's Institute will really help with that and providing means of drawing those families back in. So I'm going to go. I am really bad with this thing. So I'm going on to another group, or another area of that vineyard that we talked about earlier, and that's of homeschooling. I've been homeschooling for 15 years now. And when I first started, it was something that was still very highly uncommon, and there was still a deep stigma attached to it. So I found myself loath to speak about it unless I knew I was in the presence of friendlies. When I think about it now, we really should have had some type of code for each other. Maybe somebody would say, "There may be rain in Seaton's plain," and I could respond, "Math in pajamas keeps the dampness at bay." Solidary. Now it's a different world, because then COVID hit, and it was like an Oprah show. Like, you get to homeschool, and you get to homeschool, everybody gets to homeschool, and suddenly the stigma was removed when families saw that this was a whole new world and an option. Some of those families chose to go back to school, the brick and mortar. They saw the benefit, the great benefit on their family and their particular child and their particular needs as a family. But other families saw that it was actually a blessing, or it worked actually better for their family life. They loved a lot of those blessings and aspects that came with that adventure. And so prior to COVID, I had already been talking to a lot of parents who felt isolated, who felt very alone in their choice. And I kept thinking there has to be a way to help them connect or help bring them together, because they're like just these little pods sometimes spread out. And so a friend of mine and I created a group on Facebook called Ontario Catholic Homeschool Parents as a means of connecting and offering support to families. It benefited so many parents who felt alone and unsupported, and it helped them find the right curriculum that would work for the family. We also understood that parents had so many questions about which particular curriculum, but also scheduling challenges. There was also single parents who had questions. How do I do this? People that were full-time workers who wanted to still embrace this. And so we created this forum. And the one incredible thing is that after COVID, that number jumped up to more than 550 families, so across Ontario, who are endeavoring to do this. So it's been an amazing adventure for us. Some people ask me, why did you homeschool? And it's funny because I know that homeschooling is actually a calling, as much as having a big family is a calling. It's a particular calling to your family. I kept trying to plug my ears every time that calling came, because I was a bit selfish about my time. I thought maybe it would just be too consuming. I had too much of a high regard for education that I thought that I don't have enough of myself to lend to this and to give it what it needs to be. But then God kept kind of prompting. I kept seeing it come up in different ways, and Patrick kept talking about it, and so I knew I had to really seriously discern. And that discernment came actually one day where I was like, okay, God, if you want me to homeschool, you'll have to make it really clear. And I was like, good luck. So I went to Mass, daily Mass that day, and this woman randomly approached me, and she said, I don't go to this parish, and I don't really know who you are, but I saw you're coming to daily Mass, you've got some kids. Have you ever thought of homeschooling? And I just felt choked. And then she invited me to join a group of like-minded women who were really trying to live out their faith, and they were homeschooling. And she invited me to just start coming and spend time with them. This was before my children were of school age even. And so it gave me that chance to really build up my confidence in educating my children, but also to draw such wisdom from these seasoned homeschoolers. And so this group was really a way as well to offer that. And again, we look forward to the resources that will come from St. Monica's Institute, that we can know that there are materials and videos or books, helps that will support us in our journey, and that we can trust. Because the big issue that parents talk about is wanting to know which sources they can trust, which material, which books, which things will help them lead their children through this minefield that's been set up, this cultural minefield that almost seems to have traps set in a very subtle, often, or crafty way to try to draw children away from the faith and away from Christian values. And so it is a real blessing. It's really exciting to see what St. Monica's will do. So our job as parents is to help prepare soil for our children. And I know this isn't the vineyard parable, but I think of the sower who sows the word of God. And we know that the seed that takes root is the seed that's sown in really rich, fertile soil. And so as parents and as a church, we want to create that soil. We want to prepare it so that so much growth can occur. And with that, I'd like to turn to Connie, who will talk about that strong leadership within the church and that support and the way that our parish communities help us navigate through this cultural minefield.
Thank you so much, Carissa. You've given us so much to think about, and I'd like to take everything that you've said and everything that was said before and turn it into the beginning of a discussion. This day is to start discussions, not to have exhaustive decisions that are made at the end of the day, but to begin the discussion. Patrick? So we'd like to just talk about some opportunities for formation in parish and family life. And then as we go forth, and there's that reflection time after this session, I really invite you to think about where we can go, especially in family life. But in this circle, Patrick and I put together kind of what really shapes a parish and areas for formation. Some things are already in progress. So one aspect, liturgical ministries. The Office of Formation for Discipleship has training available. It doesn't mean that that's all that's available, but there is something already in place a little bit, or, well, more than a little bit, but we're open to more. But liturgical ministry, so Eucharist ministers, extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion, lectors, ministries of hospitality within the liturgy. Then we have parish, we have youth ministry. When Patrick and I spoke to the newly ordained deacons last week, and we had them go around and say, what's the top priority for you in your experience at the parish in terms of what we can do or what formation needs to happen? And youth ministry was huge. So that's one big area. How do we address the youth? Now, we've had conversations that one way to help talk about youth ministry is to have a really strong family ministry from baptism onward. Because if from baptism onward, the parents understand that they are parts of the church and invited and encouraged to come back, we want them to come back, and the children in early Catholic family life are brought up, then by the time they get to be youth, they're in a whole different situation than what we're hearing from people now about with some difficulties with youth ministry. Some difficulties with youth, not youth ministry. The Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, for example, is a beautiful example of collaboration, a beautiful example of bringing up children from the start to understand a relationship with Christ. So youth ministry is one area of formation. Catholic outreach in justice and love, that comes right from the pastoral plan. And that is when we talked about that three-prong area of parish, word, sacrament, and charity. What can we do in formation to help people understand that this is, in fact, part of their baptismal call? This is, in fact, part of active parish life. Sometimes with those three prongs, one takes a bigger light than the other, and so maybe more formation could be done there. I just put that out there for your consideration. Parish leadership, so this would be lay pastoral associates, catechists, clergy, ongoing formation for the clergy that St. Augustine's is so good at providing. But the whole, I know in special needs ministry that I deal with, we talk a lot about the parish receptionist and the secretary, anybody who's on the front line, who is the first face and the first voice that someone will encounter at the parish. Can we help them? Parish groups. Now, I don't mean groups that rent space in the parish hall. I mean groups that belong to the parish. So when I lived downtown, for example, St. Basil's had its own Legion of Mary group. At St. Anselm's, where I worked later, they had their own St. Vincent de Paul group and Knights of Columbus. There are many different parish groups. So that's what we mean by that. Devotional practices, and this is where the beauty of the diversity of the Archdiocese comes in. We are from so many different cultures, and there are devotional practices that really unite us, and then there are ones that are so fascinating because we haven't had exposure to one another, but it's different expressions of the same faith. I grew up in an Irish ethnic parish in the United States, But my mother was Calabrese and never forgave my father that we grew up in the Irish church and not the Italian church. But there are two very different expressions of the exact same faith. And that comes out a lot in our devotional practices. So that would be something too. That would be a great source of formation to teach us about the faith. Now, bouncing off of what Patrick and Carissa have said, intergenerational and family catechesis. Sally Amaral in our office with Formation for Discipleship has done a lot with ministry with maturing adults, and I've done some work with adult faith formation. One of the topics that keeps coming up is intergenerational catechesis, intergenerational formation, where we're not separated by age, but we learn from one another in our different age groups together. So there would be another area. RCIA and sacramental preparation. We know RCIA is sacramental preparation, but I mention it here because we're used to using the language in different ways. So that's an area that I think is probably the most common area when we talk about catechesis. But from where I sit, and meaning the calls I answer, 90% of them are, can you give me a good program? What program should I use? What program exists? And I think I'll start the conversation with you this way. I'd like us to think beyond a program and think about what it is that we're conveying. So give me something that's out of the box where I can plug and play. All right, I understand that there are numbers to contend with, but can we look at the content? And our office and formation, St. Monica has a great opportunity to be able to do some formation in catechesis in this way. Adult faith formation. That's one of the big gaps in catechesis, in parishes, in parish life. We work a lot on children, and we work a lot on maybe the elderly, and then there's marriage preparation. But then there are the rest of us. We're not kids. I'm not married. I haven't met the person yet. So we're not kids. We might not be married. And we're not quite elderly. We're on the way, but we're not quite there yet. Is there something that the parish can offer that will keep me formed in my faith? Can we think about it that way? And I think I got everything, right? Relationship ministries and marriage support. So in that, we're looking at some different things. There's marriage preparation. Of course, we've done a lot of work with that in trying to make it clear that in marriage preparation, we're not just talking about life skills, about managing money or arguing well. We're talking about sacramental preparation, or preparation for a Catholic marriage that is not sacramental, but that Catholic identity. There's work to be done. But then, once people are married, have we got something to support them throughout their married life? Or have something where they can check in? Or we've been looking recently at adult children of divorce, right? What about that? I mean, there are all kinds of ways. So these are seeds that we're just putting out there for you to consider as St. Monica Institute kind of looks at all the possibilities. From the perspective of parish and family life, these are areas that we propose can be conversation starters, and we leave it to you and to us to talk together about where we can go from there. Patrick.
I'll just leave us with some of these points here, and for continued discussion and reflection throughout this day and beyond. Some of the initial projects that we've started to collaborate with St. Monica Institute through the Office of Formation for Discipleship, but also through some of the other groups. The Archdiocese Catechist Formation Program is a program that is starting from October to June, where it trains parish catechists in, Connie, is it five courses?
4 seminars.
5 courses, 4 seminars.
Fundamentals of the faith.
On the fundamentals of the faith. So that's being offered, and St. Monica Institute offers a certificate with our office on that. Lay pastoral visitation is starting soon. I think some of these items are in some of the handouts that were presented, so thank you, Matthew. Bereavement ministry, natural family planning, is we're bringing the various organizations that support fertility awareness together, and so some of them are here. I hope all of them are represented. And as Connie mentioned, we're laying the groundwork for a ministry for the adult children of divorce, which is so important in relationships, and particularly in married relationships. And then also a program that our office has started, but we also help to leverage St. Monica Institute to get it out there further, is the Early Catholic Family Life Program, which is for parents and children, with children ages 0 through 6. And it's an opportunity for parents to come together to develop a Catholic culture in their home in their earliest years. So it's great activities for the parents to be sort of coached in terms of how to hand on the faith at various ways in a group setting. And then there's an opportunity for the little children to be accompanied to have various fun activities, Bible study, some Bible stories, a dramatic play, while the parents have an opportunity for discussion amongst themselves. And that's a real opportunity to form community among young parents. So it's something we've started the past few years, and we hope to continue that. So many more possibilities. We welcome your ideas and your comments. I'm going to pass it back to Matt. We might be at time, but I think we can continue the conversation throughout the day. Thank you.